You're watching World Insight. We begin in the Chinese capital, where the three-day third plenary session of the CPC 19 Central Committee is on its final day in Beijing. Since 1984, third plenums have taken place in autumn. This time it ran from Monday to Wednesday, just before China's political season, the two sessions. The second plenary sessions were just held last month. So what does the timing of these two plenary sessions mean, and what exactly is its content? But before the discussion, take a look at this.
The three-day session enters its final day in Beijing. The closed-door session plays a significant role, as its main tasks are deliberating on economic reforms and mapping out the economy. Senior officials are expected to discuss a structural reform plan of the party and state institutions. The plan includes China's economic and social development, as well as proposed candidates for state leadership positions. Since China's reform and opening up in 1978, the third plenary session has played a significant role for the CPC Central Committee. Main tasks include deliberating economic reforms and charting the course of the economy. In December 1978, in a landmark move, the third plenary session of the 11th CPC Central Committee decided to carry out reforms and to pursue an opening up policy. Fast forward to October 1984, the third plenary session extended the reforms from the countryside to cities. Then, in September 1988, it passed preliminary proposals on wages, paving the way for sustained reforms. In November 1993, the third plenary session established a basic framework for a market economic system. Then it decided to build a new socialist countryside in October 1998. And in the same month, in 2003, the third plenary session of the 16th CPC Central Committee decided on measures to improve the socialist market economic system. After 5 years, the third plenary session focused on problems concerning agriculture, the countryside, and farmers. In November 2013, the third plenary session of the 18th CPC Central Committee pushed for overall reforms. 2018 is a special year as it marks the 40th anniversary of China's reform and opening up, and it will be the maiden year in carrying out the spirit of the 19th CPC National Congress. People hold high expectations for this year's third plenary sessions.
For more on the third plenary session of the 19th CPC Central Committee, we are joining in our Beijing studio Victor Gao, Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization.
Thank you.
And also in Shanghai, we have Joseph Gregory Maoni, who is the Professor of Politics and the Director of the International Center for Advanced Political Studies with the East China Normal University. And also in Chicago, we welcome Dali Yang, a Professor in the Department of Political Science with the University of Chicago. I want to welcome to the three of you, gentlemen. Let's begin with you, Mr. Gao, here in Beijing. The third plenary session just wrapped up. What do you think is the biggest takeaway we should have from this session?
There are several major points. First, it made the recommendation about key leadership roles for the National People's Congress as well as for the CPPCC, and their recommendations of these key candidates will become the leaders of the next session of the NPC as well as the CPPCC. That means at the very top of the Chinese leadership you will see a new lineup of leaders recommended by the CPC third plenary session. And the second point is that it has also made a recommendation to the NPC for the reform of the party institutions. And I think this is very important because now that we are in the first full year of implementing the major decisions adopted by the 19th Party Congress, the party system as well as the government system need to be readjusted to reflect the realities on the ground so that they can better perform their functions. Once these government reorganization plan have been adopted, then you will have new leaders to be appointed to these key ministers. All these are very important for this session of the NPC, but also for many years.
Probably is a little bit different from what you just said, but let's go to Mr. Yang in Chicago. Mr. Yang, there are three goals that China has aspired to achieve over the next 3 years: eliminate extreme poverty, environmental protection, including how to make the sky blue again, and thirdly, of course, is to avoid any major dangers and risks in the financial sector and when it comes to development. With what in hand do you think China will be able to achieve those?
Well, you look at the numbers in all those areas, there have been progress, and also there is very, very strong commitment on the part of the top leadership. But at the same time, as Mr. Gao has emphasized, the new leadership also is actually introducing structural government reforms in particular that would enhance the fulfillment of those goals. In fact, for example, leveraging, it's likely that there might be actually a unified financial services regulator. The ministries of land and resources and also the Ministry of Environmental Protection might combine functions so that they would have actually a greater role to play in terms of regulating the environment. So all of those actually are being put on the agenda at this very moment.
Professor Maloney, we all understand that there are different proposals, before recent months that how the government should streamline and what is the best efficiency, what is the relations between the government and the party. And it seems that with the third plenum of the 19th Party Congress, a lot of dust has already settled. At this point, Professor, we do not know the exact details because it has not been made public to the press and also to the public yet. But given what you know, can those streamlines and the discussions be able to help China move forward with the three goals as we just mentioned?
I think so. I think this. In the United States, for example, we usually have the first 100 days of a new administration, and I think one of the things that we're seeing is a central leadership that's really unified around the core. We look back at the 19th Congress as being a relatively recent event, but in fact, that was an event that was staged and had to come about after 5 years. These plans have probably been in place and been developed over a longer period of time, and why wait when you're ready? But it looks like that they're really aiming at realizing what is probably one of the best features of the Chinese system, the ability to move towards efficiency and to rapidly implement changes.
I see. Rapidly implementing the changes, that would take efficiency of the bureaucracy, of course, of Mr. Gao. But what have we got so far? With some of the streamlines of the government organization, that would probably take a few years to make it efficient running again. Will that be able to help us to immediately resolve the difficulties and the challenges within the next 3 years? That's the question.
That's a question, but I think we will soon have the answers. For example, the current lineup of the ministries, agencies, commissions in the state council system were more or less decided probably more than 10 years ago. And changes have taken place tremendously in China, and we need to really readdress this issue. For example, currently we have a copyright bureau, we have patent bureau, and we also have an intellectual rights bureau. So I think they had played their historical role. Now maybe they need to be combined together to form a new intellectual property protection bureau. So this can better and become more efficient in dealing with all these intellectual property issues. There is now a Ministry of Agriculture, there is now a Ministry of Forestry. Maybe these two ministries can be combined together to cut down the waste, cut down inefficiency, and improve efficiency going forward. There are quite a few of these examples. The rule of the thumb is that right now we have up to about 30 ministries and commissions and bureaus within the State Council framework. Eventually they may be streamlined down to about less than 20. So we are very much opening up our eyes and look forward to what exactly will be the detail of the proposal to be discussed at the National People's Congress, and whether the delegates to the National People's Congress will be as enthusiastic in supporting these as I am supporting these reforms. And hopefully the streamlining and the efficiency will help the reform going forward in many years.
Professor Yang, you've been studying Chinese politics, contemporary time. You see the third plenary session of every party congress has always been making something quite historical. Every time, almost. That has become a logic almost. So how do you see this time compared to the previous times? And what do you think this China, at this critical juncture, when the role of China is ever evolving in the world, what would this mean for China's own thinking about what kind of country it aspires to become?
Well, I think it's most interesting indeed since the end of the 1970s, the third plenary sessions have emphasized reform. And in this particular case, we have President Xi and Premier Li Keqiang. They have been in their positions for 5 years. They have also a comprehensive reform commission or leadership group actually improving and also approving various policies for the last 5 years. And all of those are coming together. There is a lot of knowledge, a lot of information, a lot of initiatives on the table for the last 5 years, and now they want to bring some of those together. There is a lot of sense of urgency that reforms are not moving as fast as they should be. And at the same time, however, with their experience, with their knowledge, with their enhanced powers that they have accumulated, so they want to implement those with this particular session in terms of rationalizing the government. And also now, one of the most significant developments is the establishment of the National Supervision Commission as well. So in that sense, actually, this is a very significant plenary session. They are bringing it up actually right ahead of the National People's Congress so that those reforms will be implemented right as a new lineup for the government ministers are being introduced as well.
Professor Maloney, we all remember Chinese President Xi Jinping last year at the World Economic Forum in Davos has committed to the world of the role that China aspires to play for the international community. This year, Mr. Liu He, when he went to Davos, he also committed about further reform and opening up of China. That was also applauded following Chinese president's speech last year by the delegates there. But the question is, how will China be able to fulfill that role while at the same time try to streamline in quite a dramatic way within the country as well? So how is China going to play both hands inside the country and also playing a role internationally? Professor Maloney.
Well, it's clear it's a very large task, and you know, as China goes through its supply-side structural reforms, as it goes through rebalancing, moving from quantity to quality, trying to drive innovation, encourage development in the countryside, and eliminate poverty. All of these things while at the same time advancing One Belt, One Road, taking advantage of new opportunities overseas. It obviously needs to remain committed to this broader economic system that has served it very well over the course of reform and opening up, and that has new mechanisms in place with AIIB and other institutions. So, you know, I think what we're seeing is a very active leadership that realizes that they need to move very quickly. One of the things that I think is really fascinating is the way a number of foreign countries have read this plenum. They see it as an opportunity where China can really consolidate its power. The top leadership can consolidate its power not only at home, but in terms of its projects overseas. So I see this as putting the best foot forward, but it's obviously going to be a very difficult job.
It is going to be a very challenging job. Professor Yang, once again, I want to go to you. Now we read the news that India aspired to become the fastest growth economy in the world when it comes to GDP growth rate, 7.2%. Of course, China, when it comes to its development model, is already switching from the absolute growth to something of quality growth. But the question is, will China, on the one hand, not necessarily holding on to the numbers anymore, but on the other hand, make sure the quality of its economic development is really going to be as it wishes?
Well, absolutely. And in fact, I do want to remind us that the leadership emphasizes now that China remains led by a communist party, and socialist ideals are important. And a lot of the emphasis today in paying attention to people's livelihood, whether it's in environmental protection or in terms of fighting against poverty, those are regulatory and redistributive functions that socialist governments are supposed to do well. And I think actually you see a lot of that emphasis by the current leadership, and I think that resonate in terms of global consensus as well. But at the same time, however, China has done quite well in terms of innovation, in terms of raising living standards. And I think actually we are going to continue to see that. And now, however, China has a much higher level of per capita GDP compared to India. So therefore, China can afford to do the redistributive functions that it has actually sort of been emphasizing over the last few years in particular, but at the same time, upgrade the economy, improve the environment. And I think actually sort of those are arduous tasks for any government. But at this point, however, we do have a leadership that's extremely committed.
All right. Dr. Gao, also to you as well, another very important question. I mean, China has been developing over the past 40 years, reform opening up. That's something that the Chinese are very proud of, no matter where we are, all over the world. And the world is looking at it as a miracle, as something of enormous achievement. The question is, what exactly is the takeaway of 40 years of reform and opening up, particularly at a critical juncture that we should think about our future?
Yes, indeed, the transformation and the achievements of China are profound, complete, unprecedented. And this is very important. This is probably the largest scale achievements in human history. Just remember, 40 years ago, before China started the reform and opening to the outside world, India had a larger GDP than China. But as of today, China's GDP is about 5 times as big as India. India is only about 20% of China's GDP. Therefore, I personally congratulate India on having a high GDP growth rate at about 7.2, and I hope they will really achieve great success going forward.
The question is, Mr. Gao, what is the takeaway of China's reform opening up to you, for example?
To me, for example, there are several key points. One is maintaining stability at home and keeping peace abroad. Try to avoid getting involved in any war outside of China and maintain stability. Without stability, whatever you gain will be wasted again. So maintaining stability, keeping peace. The other thing is keep innovation. Over the past 40 years, I think what saved China is our innovation and creativity. Deng Xiaoping's push for socialism with Chinese characteristics, for example, for socialist market economy, for example, for one country, two system. All these are great breakthroughs because these are impossibilities for any other person. But under China, under the leadership of Deng Xiaoping of the Communist Party of China, these become breakthroughs. And I think today we are still moving on to this road of innovation, creativity. Always stand firm on your own values, but always open-minded to learn from any other country in the world.
China is already reaching somewhere, and that is another question related to this, which is, Professor Yang, that is whether China will still have that strong momentum as over the past 40 years, reform opening up today, because it's already the second largest economy, and it's already eradicated most of the poverty in the country, even though it is fighting against extreme poverty still. So will there be strong momentum? What is going to unify the people together?
Well, certainly this national pride is important, that in fact a lot of people, most of the people actually are for the kind of development. Aspirations are extremely high. You ask the question, do you think your children will do better than you do? The Chinese people answer very affirmatively and ranks one of the highest. But that also means that the government, the leadership needs to deliver. And at the same time, there are significant regional disparities. Some parts of the country are extremely innovative, developing extremely well, but there are also parts of the country that actually have lagged behind and will continue to struggle, in fact. And that's where we see how the central government is coming in with redistributive fiscal policies, with emphasis on actually various local reforms as well, and with greater actually room for local authorities to make laws in the future so that they can tailor their policies and laws to local circumstances. But of course, as we know, every country struggles with their own portfolio of problems and challenges, China being so large and so on, and with such development behind, it has to innovate, and that actually remains to be seen how fast it will be. And also population aging and the welfare liabilities will continue to increase as well. And that will present some challenges. And I do think actually the leadership recognizes those challenges, are trying to rise to the occasion.
All right. And we are approaching the two sessions, NPC and CPPCC. Certainly, this is usually the annual political season. This year is going to be very different because there's going to be the government, new officials coming in, and there's also going to be the decisions made by the 19th Party Congress, and that is likely to be ratified and also discussed by the NPC deputies. Having said that, though, Professor Maiani, to you, what are some of the issues that you would look very closely for the next few weeks to come?
Well, I think you know, a lot of attention has been focused on the constitutional amendments. A number of these have been mentioned so far. The Supervisory Commission clearly is going to have much more overlap between the state and the party apparatus, and that'll probably make discipline inspections and other supervisory concerns much more robust and effective. But also the issue with presidential term limits, as well as raising the ecological minister. I think what we're going to see is a lot of enthusiasm and quick action.
All right. Thank you so much. We're running out of time for this discussion. Thank you so much, gentlemen, the three of you, Victor Gao,
Thank you,
Joseph Gregory Mahoney, and also Dali Yang.